Hey guys, welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. My name is Jason, just a guy who studied the founders and the words of the prophets a bunch, um, and of course the Constitution itself a bunch. I would say that I'm guilty of, as a lot of people, of starting off with books about Supreme Court rulings and the Federalist Papers and commentary on the founders and but fortunately a lot of talks from the general authorities regarding the Constitution too first, and so I would say that's where my more sure foundation actually came from. Was from, in my opinion, and I'm going to go ahead and defend that real quick here. So Ezra Taft Benson in the talk, Jesus Christ, Gifts and Expectations, uh, rejects the idea that the Supreme Court, that the Constitution is what the Supreme Court says it is, and he instead says it is what President McKay said it is, which it is the tradition and the way the founders understood it, and it is what the prophets say it is. And so those are two ways to view the Constitution. Um, and when we refer to the founders, I'm going to go ahead and say that the ultimate two founders were Jefferson and Madison. Okay, I know people like to talk about George Washington a lot, and he merits every bit of respect. But the honest truth of who the founders were, the intellectual founders, the view, right, of how things were supposed to work, not the trustworthy muscle, was actually Jefferson and Madison. They're both given credit as the main authors of our main two founding documents. And their commentary on the Constitution is the most honest commentary I've found ever. So I just want to talk about the view. Let's talk about the prophets first. So clearly, Joseph Smith viewed the Constitution and the privileges and immunities referenced in Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1 as something that the federal government could enforce when states were depriving someone who had just recently moved from this state to this state, and suddenly they expect to have their privileges and immunities, and instead they're getting abused. Joseph Smith believed that the president's take care clause to see that the laws are faithfully executed, which the Constitution itself being the supreme law of the land, and the amendments 2 through 9 being part of the supreme law of the land also. He said the president should come and help me. And Van Buren, I think, being influenced by Barron v. Baltimore, the Supreme Court's opinion on amendments 2 through 9, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And when you have a written document, the citizens should be able to trust that that written document means what it says. They should not have to pay for a lawyer to understand it. That is unconscionable. That is not right. That is unacceptable. That is not government by law. That is government by the opinions of men, and will never be right. It is not what we believe in. Look at the first principle in Defending Our Divinely Inspired Constitution by Dallin H. Oaks. Okay, so Joseph Smith looks at the plain reading of the Constitution and says, yeah, federal government has the right to protect us from this ridiculous state of Missouri. We should have had our privileges and immunities, and look what they're doing to us. So he goes and appeals to President Van Buren to deal with it. And I'm blocking my goats from pestering two of our guard dogs, so that are eating their food right now. So anyhow, easy enough. That way nobody else knows what's going on except for me. So yes, the federal government had the authority. If you look at Article 4, if you look at Article 6, Clause 2, for example, it doesn't say who enforces Article 6, Clause 2. It just says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, followed by then the laws, followed by then the treaties, followed by then the state laws. And if any of them are being violated by anyone, it doesn't say who to enforce it. And that's the point. It's an agreement. Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1 doesn't say who to enforce it. It's part of an agreement. Amendments 2 through 9 doesn't say that it's restricted to only restricting the federal government. That's because these were the laws of nature and of nature's God. Everybody should have expected those protections from all levels of government. And whenever one level of government was out of line, the other government should step in and stop it. There should be a presumption of liberty. That's the main meaning of the Ninth Amendment. Jefferson then also commented, so I just mentioned the views of the prophets. The view of the prophet Joseph Smith was the federal government did already have the authority to step in. Okay, now I'm going to mention the views of the founders. And Jefferson, if you ask me, being the ultimate founder, look at the Kentucky resolutions. If not, look at the Virginia resolutions if you want something slightly softer, slightly milder. Okay, but the point is, they believed that, again, if the federal government was overstepping its bounds and trampling on the liberties, assuming powers into itself that weren't granted unto it. In particular, though, again, the main point was this was dealing with the sedition laws, which was, again, trampling the liberties of the people. Then, as far as Jefferson was concerned, any level of government, any branch of government should have been stopping that from happening. And so the Virginia resolutions were written, the Kentucky resolutions were written, and they were basically telling the federal government, this needs to stop. Okay? And then Jefferson, in his letter to Abigail Adams, says, yeah, sure, the Supreme Court passed sentence, or the courts passed sentence on this and that, but the law they sentenced people for violating was an unconstitutional law. So being the executive who's supposed to carry out the sentence, I'm not going to. Right? So everybody was intended to be the final word on certain things. That's the whole point. It's the Constitution is a law of agency. Frederick Douglass, after years of studying it, said the Constitution is perfect as is. It's just we're not following it. And this was prior to the Reconstruction Amendments. So I guess I should double check and look that up, but I'm positive. Yeah, because he's referencing the need to end slavery. So clearly it was prior to the Reconstruction Amendments. And anyhow, views of the founders and the views of the prophets. The prophets believed that all levels of government needed to stop the trampling of the rights of the people. The founders believed that all levels and all branches of government needed to do the same. And that's the point. So Article 4, the majority of it has no reference to one or the other being the one to enforce it. As a matter of fact, if you look at Clause 4, it references the federal government being the one to enforce it, but that's only on petition of the governor. But that's regarding domestic violence, and domestic violence was a separate topic from privileges and immunities. Okay, and with the saints in particular, we are talking about privileges and immunities. We are talking about people who had lived in Ohio, who had lived in New York, who assumed they should have the same privileges and immunities moving to Missouri. Okay, and then again, with the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions, we're talking about the oath of office isn't to some official's opinion. Jefferson later on said when he heard about Federalist 78, I believe in 1820, he wrote a letter to a friend who had showed him what Hamilton had claimed in Federalist 78. So this is way later, like 30 some odd years later. He says, oh my gosh, that's a ridiculous doctrine. That would make the Constitution a complete felo de se if the Supreme Court were the final arbiter of the meaning of the whole thing. In other words, they saw felo de se was a term for the concept that back then they saw suicide as a felony, and all your inheritance, everything was gone at that point. It was an unacceptable action, and so it was a criminal suicide is what they called it. If what Jefferson is saying, if we were to trust the Supreme Court to be the final arbiter, he said it would make them a despotic branch. So basically, it really always was the responsibility of everybody to cover it. Barron v. Baltimore, the Supreme Court says, oh no, Amendments 2 through 9 are only restrictions on the federal government, not on the states. That's a terrible interpretation. You allowed people to apply it early on, which that was a Supreme Court opinion, and it was a disaster. It ruined the understanding of the Constitution. So, along with other things that were done by other Supreme Court officials in particular. So, that's it. If you haven't seen my, what's it called? Judicial oligarchy video, please go and watch that. I feel like that's one of the more important topics that I've recently covered. Then again, I'm probably going to call this one Views of the Founders and the Prophets regarding the Constitution. So, all right, thanks you guys. Have a great day.